Welcome to A Slice with Dice, a podcast exploring the ideas, pressures, and possibilities shaping how we learn, lead, and grow. I'm Corey Alderdice. For over 20 years, my work has lived at the intersection of gifted education, leadership development, and school culture, supporting students as they find their strengths, educators as they stretch their thinking, and schools as they build pathways that expand opportunity. Ready to dive in? Here's this week's Slice. There's a moment that catches a lot of parents off guard. Their child is doing well in school. The grades are strong, teachers like them, they have friends. From the outside, everything appears to be working exactly as it should. And yet somewhere along the way, that student begins asking questions that feel surprisingly complicated. Maybe they start exploring magnet schools, residential programs, dual enrollment opportunities, or even specialized academies. Maybe they begin talking about wanting more challenge, different peers, or opportunities that simply don't exist where they are. And sometimes parents hear those conversations and immediately wonder if something is wrong. But often, nothing is wrong at all. What I've increasingly come to describe over the years is something I call the satisfaction gap. And despite the name, I don't really mean dissatisfaction in the way most people think about it. I'm not talking about students being miserable or unhappy. In fact, many students who begin searching for something different are doing perfectly fine in their current environment. The satisfaction gap is really the growing distance between what a student increasingly needs and what their current environment is able to provide. And that distinction matters. One of the mistakes adults sometimes make is assuming that if a student is successful, then they must also be fully fulfilled. Those are not always the same thing. A student can earn straight A's and still feel intellectually underfed. They can have friends and still feel isolated from peers who share their interests or ambitions. They can be deeply involved in school and still feel like they have reached the edge of what the environment can offer them academically, creatively, or socially. And I think this becomes important, especially during adolescence, because that's a natural period where students begin changing rapidly. Their awareness expands, their ambitions evolve, their sense of identity becomes more sophisticated. Students who once simply wanted to fit in suddenly begin wondering where they truly belong. They start asking bigger questions about who they're becoming and what kind of environment best support that growth. That can create tension for families because parents often experience school through a very different lens than students do. Parents frequently look at stability, safety, relationships, and success markers and understandably think, why would you want to leave? Meanwhile, the student may be experiencing something much harder to articulate. They may simply feel that what once felt sufficient no longer fully does. I've seen this countless times when students considering residential STEM schools, selective magnets, early college programs, charter schools, or even independent schools. Rarely are students making these decisions solely because they dislike where they are. More often, they're responding to the possibility of something more aligned to who they are becoming. They're looking for challenge. They're looking for peers who share their intensity or curiosity. They're looking for opportunities that stretch them. Sometimes they're looking for reinvention. Sometimes they're simply looking for permission to become more fully themselves. And that's a very different thing than failure. In fact, I think one of the most important reframes for parents is understanding that developmental restlessness is not always a problem to solve. Sometimes it's simply a signal to pay attention to. Now, that doesn't mean every student who feels restless should immediately change schools, nor does it mean that every feeling of dissatisfaction is healthy or productive. Adolescence can amplify emotions and create temporary frustrations. But I do think parents benefit from resisting the instinct to immediately dismiss those feelings, simply because things appear objectively successful from the outside. Because sometimes students recognize ceilings before adults do. Particularly with highly motivated or high-capacity students, there are moments where they begin sensing that they are no longer being fully challenged, stretched, or understood by their environment. That awareness can emerge academically, socially, creatively, or emotionally, and interestingly, students often struggle to explain this clearly because they themselves don't fully understand it yet. They just know something feels incomplete. I also think this conversation matters because we're living in a moment where students have more educational choices than ever before. Previous generations often attended the neighborhood school by default and rarely considered alternatives. Today, families are navigating magnets, charters, residential schools, micro schools, concurrent programs, virtual opportunities, dual enrollment, and specialized academies. That expanded landscape means students are increasingly aware that different educational environments exist. And once students realize those possibilities are available, many begin naturally comparing those opportunities against their own current experience. That comparison can widen the satisfaction gap. And I think this is where parents play an incredibly important role. Not necessarily by rushing toward change, but by remaining curious. Curious about what their child is actually expressing beneath the surface. Curious about whether the issue is temporary frustration or a deeper developmental mismatch. Curious about whether the student is simply bored for a season or genuinely craving a different kind of environment and community. Sometimes the best thing a parent can do is stop asking what's wrong and start asking, what might my child be growing toward? Because ultimately, many students are not trying to escape failure. They're trying to move toward possibility. And that can be difficult for parents because growth often requires students to step beyond familiarity. It may require leaving behind comfort, routines, established friendships, or environments that once felt perfectly adequate. But that doesn't mean those environments failed the student. Sometimes it simply means the student has changed. And I think that's an important distinction worth holding on to. Not every student needs a different school. Not every student experiences a satisfaction gap in the same way. But when students begin expressing that something feels missing, parents should recognize those conversations may be about much more than academics alone. They may be early signs of identity formation, ambition, self-awareness, and emerging agency. And sometimes, those moments become the beginning of remarkable growth. A Slice with Dice is a production of Aldercube. Thanks for making time to reflect with me. If you're finding value in these episodes, I hope you'll subscribe and help spread the word. Until next time, lead boldly, listen closely, and keep pushing forward. I'll see you then.